Manifesto of the Free Humans, Chapter 15, Getting Off the Control Grid and Defending the Agora. When discussing the idea of a free society, one of the most frequently asked questions is, how do we get from here to there? The transition is without a doubt the most challenging step on the path to freedom, but throughout this book we have laid the foundation for a possible future. Now, we will end this journey by exploring how we can sever our involuntary relationship with the state once and for all. Our goal is to establish alternative ways of living prior to our emancipation from government. These alternatives are the lifeboats that will allow us to escape the sinking ship. This is where the importance of freedom cells, counter-economics, and competing with the state services and institutions comes into play. As free-thinking people begin to create free communities in geographical regions that are still disputed or claimed by governments, there will be a need for self-defense. Some free humans will also want to agitate the existing government in hopes of weakening it and spurring on its demise. Our primary focus should be on growing the counter-economy and Agora, and we do this by reducing our dependence and support of the existing government. We need a sustained, coordinated campaign of non-cooperation, tax resistance, counter-economic activity, and mass opting out of the structures operated by state and corporate power. This should be done in tandem with a push for individual healing, community building, and compassionate activism. We believe tax resistance is absolutely necessary to weaken the state. Those invested in the counter-economy are already taking sales tax away from the state, and if you can make your money off the books or under the table, do not hesitate. If you can be paid in alternative currencies, even better. Every cent you take away from the state is a victory on the path to realizing the conscious Agora. Some freedom cells may choose to continue to pay their taxes or avoid the income tax and sales tax when possible, until the time arrives where the state is too weak to pursue them or they are capable of defending themselves from thieving tax collectors. Connected cells and communities may choose to band together to coordinate an organized tax resistance campaign to further agitate and weaken the state. If we work diligently, we can make a coordinated tax resistance campaign go viral across freedom cells spread throughout the U.S. If we are able to prevent the state from taking funds that equal the annual defense budget, we believe the state will take notice of their waning influence and power. The U.S. government's revenue from federal, state, and local sources was estimated to be $7 trillion during 2016. About $4.6 trillion of that comes from income and payroll taxes, the exact taxes one avoids by joining the counter-economy. During 2016, the Department of Defense, responsible for the U.S. military, had a budget of $582 billion. As the numbers show, it would only require a loss of less than $1 trillion in income and payroll taxes to remove the budget for the Department of Defense. This would make it difficult, not impossible, for the state to continue to wage war, and it would send a message that the people are getting organized. The state will be forced to have the Federal Reserve print massive sums of money, which will only hasten the push towards hyperinflation and economic chaos. Amidst this chaos, the agorists will jump into action and offer counter-economic services and assistance to those who chose not to prepare. The state could also take money away from popular government services like welfare, veteran assistance, etc., and redirect it towards the war effort, but this is also likely to be an unpopular move. Will the people really stand by and do nothing as their government takes their services they have become accustomed to in the name of more war? Let's hope not. Either way, this will serve to weaken the power and influence of the state. As the existing government's economic power and support wither away, it will be more difficult for them to hire enforcers to follow their arbitrary orders, and formerly proud law-abiding, tax-paying citizens will flock to the counter-economy. As this process takes place, the tables will turn and there will be a shift of power between the free people and the governments. The state would no longer have the upper hand in terms of raw physical strength. The drones, tanks, and other machinery of death will no longer be affordable for tyrants now that their formerly compliant tax cattle began to leave the farm by withdrawing their support for the system. Likewise, the soldiers and police forces who support oppression and suppression of revolution will have to rethink following orders once the propaganda of the state is destroyed. In fact, even in today's political climate, the government is having increasing difficulty finding people to fly their drones and wear their badges. On January 4, 2015, Air Force Chief of Staff General Mark Welsh sent an internal memo to General Hebert Hawk Carlisle complaining about drone pilots quitting in record numbers. Welsh said he feared that this exodus could cripple drone combat readiness for years to come. Indeed, military and police forces are constantly lowering standards and raising wages in attempts to lure more people into their order-following campaigns. Considering this, imagine the impact that could be made if large numbers of people began rejecting the government's legitimacy and organizing to strangle its support system. The outcomes of this strategy are real and can be seen throughout history. The counter-economy can and will overtake the state when enough people are participating. One of the most obvious and historical examples of this is seen in the fall of the Soviet Union, which was brought on by widespread smuggling, tax avoidance, and other black market activity. The underground economy was a part of everyday life for most people living in the Soviet Union, as it was actually necessary for their survival in many cases. Eventually, the ever-growing restrictions and rations on the people stimulated the growth of the counter-economy, and people began to trade untaxed goods and services until the government was starved of resources and support. At the time, Berkeley economist Gerard Rowland noted that in the Soviet Union, quote, "the logic of the second economy tended over time to undermine the logic of the command system and lead to expanding black markets." End quote. This observation was later confirmed by Vladimir G. Trimmel and Michael V. Alexeyev in their study The Second Economy and the Destabilization Effect of Its Growth on the State Economy in the Soviet Union, 1965 to 1989. The study found that the disparity between legal income and legal spending grew significantly in the period between 1965 and 1989, meaning that people were spending much more money than they were making on the books, pointing to widespread black market activity. In their study, Trimmel and Alexeyev concluded that the counter-economy was largely responsible for the fall of the Soviet Union. This was done entirely by accident, simply for the sake of survival, and even under these conditions, the existing government collapsed. However, without the philosophy of agorism, anarchism, or even libertarianism to follow through on this accomplishment, the oppressed people of the Soviet Union allowed a new government to be formed and fell into bondage yet again. The collapse of the Soviet Union shows us that the counter-economy can be used to weaken or even overthrow very powerful governments, but this victory will be short-lived if people fail to follow through and apply the philosophy of agorism to their counter-economic activity. When the state does get to a weakened point, fighting back against its agents becomes easier, and it becomes possible to physically push them back out of territories claimed by the Agora. This dynamic can be seen in many developing countries where the central governments are very weak. When a protest or uprising happens in a place like this, it is not unusual to see heavily armed or equipped government agents retreat from mobs of protesters that greatly outnumber them. This is not something that is possible in the US today, but it is something that could be possible once the counter-economy takes enough power away from the state. Still, we must remember that our goal is not to initiate violence against the state. Our goal is not a violent revolution, or a revolution at all. The word implies revolving and going in circles, which is exactly what we should expect should we initiate force. As Samuel Konkin commented in the New Libertarian Manifesto, quote, "Never initiate an act of violence, regardless how likely a libertarian result may appear. To do so is to reduce yourself to a statist. There are no exceptions to this rule. Either you are fundamentally consistent or not." End quote. We want to abolish the state and create a world free of oppression and suffering, but we must not lose sight of ourselves in the pursuit of this goal. Every revolutionary throughout history who chose violence ended up becoming a monster and a shadow of what they pursued. Remain heart-centered no matter how violent the state becomes or how divisive the political climate. We are after an evolution of hearts and minds. To sustain a long-term evolution, whether a physical fight against oppressors or a battle of hearts and minds, we must cultivate physical, mental, and spiritual strength and awareness. We believe the ideas presented in this series are a handbook which can be helpful in leading one down the path to freedom and autonomy. Finally, we are not claiming to be enlightened masters speaking of peace, yet failing to embody the principles. Both of us have made plenty of mistakes and have much room to grow. However, we believe the principles and lifestyle espoused within our books are ideals to strive for. The Conscious Resistance offers the quickest way to lead our world towards a more free, ethical, and spiritually empowered world.